Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I hate that book. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. How much time do I have?
Great haircut, and I knew I liked you, so excited to talk to you.
SBA loans are great. However, they're not the end all be all because you can't put toothpaste back in the tube, so to speak. There might be ways where you can get to the closing table without really any money.
Hey everybody, Brian Lee here from Prairie Founders Club, and today we've got a really cool episode. I hang out with Mike Kuzma. He's a partner over at the Spencer Fane law firm. He heads up the business transaction group there, and he goes through the pros and cons of whether or not to start your own business from scratch or just to buy one that's existing and maybe buy some runway too. So, hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome, Mike. How's it going?
Good, man. Good. Thanks for having me on, Brian.
We're really excited to hear about your background and imagining what it might be like to purchase a business versus creating your own, and excited to hear your thoughts. So tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started. Where are you located, and what do you do?
Yeah. So I am a partner at the law firm Spencer Fane. I actually just moved over from the Hilgers law firm. And I am a partner in the business transactions group. So I represent buyers and sellers of businesses, of commercial real estate, and entity formation and all aspects thereof, capital raising and the like. So I've been doing this for 15 years. I've got the gray to show for it, but feel very comfortable in this area and really enjoy helping both buyers and sellers get to what they want, which is usually sellers want to sell their business and get a good price. Buyers want to buy and make sure they're getting a good asset that they can make money on. And it sounds simple, but just like the game of golf, simple does not mean easy.
That's a great analogy. And you have a great haircut, and I knew I liked you, so excited to talk to you. So, Mike, for someone that's thinking about starting a business, what are some reasons they should consider buying an existing business instead?
I think benefits of buying an existing business, especially with the big demographic shifts that we are seeing with the baby boomer generation retiring, there's a lot of opportunity, and that buying a business is something that a lot of people may not have thought of. But today I want to unpack that and explain why it can make a lot of financial sense.
You know, you mentioned the baby boomers. I mean, I'm of the generation where my parents are the baby boomers, and we are light years ahead of them in technology. So it seems like there might be a lot of opportunity to kind of upgrade the systems with technology, whether that be CRM, whether that be whatever type of software you can have to increase the value of these businesses. Is that something that people think about?
100%. I have done several transactions where that is, that goal right there kind of underpins the theory for why the buyer wanted to buy the business in the first place. Have you ever heard the saying, "Can't teach an old dog new tricks"? Well, sometimes that can provide opportunity just by bringing an existing business into the 2020s and applying some modern technology.
So is it a myth to think that starting your own business is safer because it costs less? Like, what are some of the downsides of starting your own business?
Oh man, how much time do I have? Well, first off, starting a business is incredibly time intensive. And let's say you are a plumber. Well, your highest and best use is out in the field, training, journeymen, getting jobs, doing bids, that sort of thing. It is not HR. It is not accounting. It is not IT infrastructure. It is not bookkeeping. And that's okay. And so when you start a business, you wear all the hats. You are the HR department, you are the legal department, you're the finance department. And so you end up, I've seen this many times and been guilty of it myself with a couple of side projects, where instead of working on the business, you're working in the business, just doing that day to day and spinning your wheels on a lot of stuff that is, A, not generating revenue, and B, not really adding to the business, the value of the business in general. It's just turning and keeping things afloat.
And so we talk a lot about runway when we start a business, meaning like how much time we have to get to where we need to go. Can buying a business allow you to buy a runway in some ways?
I certainly think so. I certainly think so for a number of reasons. One is when you say buy a business, it's important to note that that does not always mean you come to the closing table with a check. Oftentimes, you're buying someone's life work, a family business, or a longtime employee is buying it from their employer. And so in that situation, that the seller might look at that as kind of their retirement plan.
Mm.
And so there might be ways where you can get to the closing table without really any money.
Hmm.
And so that's point one. And then point two is that then once you get in control, oftentimes, especially with these, there's a learning curve
Hmm.
of how you actually run it. And so having that, person or persons that are the sellers around on a contract basis for a while is really important. And then you can also, there are legal mechanisms that we can use to incentivize that, to make sure that baton handoff is smooth and is in everybody's best interests.
Well, you said something that caught my ear, and I think it's going to catch a lot of people's ear. That's coming to the table without any money. Like, can you give us, without going into too deep, like what is the scenario in which you might come with no money?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay, so there are a lot of scenarios where you can come to the table with very little money. And so when you're transferring a business, oftentimes you're transferring either the equity in the underlying entity or the assets or a combination. And you can structure things in a way that the cost of that business is paid out over time from the profits of the business. And then if the entrepreneur is successful and grows those profits, that will then allow that person to pay off the note or whatever, however it's structured, faster or pay themselves sooner. And again, then also that creates a revenue trail, almost like an annuity for the seller, which allows them to do a couple of things. It allows them to not have a big taxable event up front, so they get to spread out those taxable gains over a period of years. And then it also ensures that, for the seller's perspective, in the event a sale happens, but we usually call them a promissory note or a note for short, that note will carry over. And so in the event the new buyer stops making payments, they can take back their asset and sell it to the next person. Now that we don't like that to happen, I try to do transactions that are smooth, that go, where everybody gets what they want, which is the buyer gets the business and the seller gets their money paid out over however we structure that.
That is fascinating. Now, without going into an entire financing course, which maybe we'll have to do as a follow-up, but are most of these done through SBA loans, or like what's the most common way to acquire a business? Or is it all over the board?
I say it's kind of all over the board. SBA loans are great. SBA loans are great. However, they're not the end all be all. They are one of many ways to get to the closing table. And so that's certainly one way, but it's not the only way. And to your question of what do I see most often, I'm going to do the most lawyerly thing I can possibly think of and say it really just depends. It really depends. Who's the buyer? I mean, it usually comes down to that question. It depends on who is the buyer.
This reminds me a lot of real estate, because when you're acquiring a house, there's a lot of different ways you can do it from just the normal way. And the more creative you can get, the more, interesting you can make a win-win scenario for everyone. So it sounds similar.
Yep. Very much so.
Speaking of risk, so what are some risks in purchasing a business that you may not have in starting your own?
I'm also going to have to say it depends. So when purchasing a business, which, especially for the audience here, I highly recommend, if you're thinking about a business, it's going to cost a little bit more money. However, it allows you to hit the ground running and work on the business sooner because, again, like I mentioned earlier, you don't have you're not HR, you're not accounting, and you're not also the office admin getting the supplies and toilet paper, right?
That's a good point.
Right. So you free up to just work on the business from day one.
Hmm.
Two, you might have legacy employees that come over with you. So again, adding that
Hmm.
extra layer. Whereas if you start from scratch, from the blank slate, you're going to have to find all of those people. Now, in some industries where you can be a one-person business, that's okay. But in, I'd say heavier manpower industries, that built-in infrastructure can really help supercharge the business owner to get up and going and execute their plan, because they can focus on pulling the levers of the business
Hmm.
and not necessarily the day to day of keeping the lights on, getting accounting, billing, HR, etc.
Um, one of the things you talked about when we were on our pre podcast call was that a lot of the opportunities are in some of the more boring businesses, or maybe the businesses you wouldn't have thought of. So what industries are ripe for acquisition in, I guess, the least friction as possible, or like more cash flow earlier in the system? Or what are some industries you recommend?
Well, I can't necessarily recommend all industries, but I can speak to deals that we've done. Um, and so I've seen quite a few transitions of service businesses, plumbing, HVAC, electrical, even certain subcontracting entities. The other I've seen a lot of is medical practices,
Mm,
notably family
mm,
practices and dentistry practices, optometry clinics as well.
mm.
Because where a practice like that, it's basically a trade name and the doctor and that patient list. I mean, those are really the assets that you're buying. But if you're a young doctor, fresh out of optometry school, or pick your specialty, that can help you sort of supercharge and step into the shoes of the retiring doctor
Mm.
to then take over those patients, which do have value.
Interesting. Um, I do you have to have expertise in the industry? Like, if I've never done roofing before, should I get into roofing, or like what do people learn on the job, or do you find most people gravitate towards what they're already doing?
I find that most of the most successful folks usually have some sort of either heavy interest in or experience in. Like I am a corporate lawyer. I'm a deal lawyer. I I don't like going to court. And so me buying, a law practice, for example, where you're going to be spending a lot of time in court doing,
That's true.
DUIs and that kind of thing,
Right.
that's just not a good fit.
Hmm.
Even though technically my license allows for it. And so I think it's one of those know thyself sorts of situations, because I don't see why somebody that's really ambitious and skilled couldn't learn a certain kind of business. But I don't know. The ones I see most often, there's usually some sort of hook
Hmm.
to the underlying business.
Absolutely. Um, where do these deals go down? Is there a website? Is it word of mouth? Are you plugged into a network?
Mhm.
Where do these deals go down?
Yeah. Um, a, Several places. Business brokers have become a much bigger, I would say, player in we call it the middle market, SME, small and medium enterprise market. So you see a lot of business brokers that do that sort of thing. The other is, commercial bankers. They usually have a pretty good beat on their clientele, and know about these sorts of opportunities, years before they
Mm,
might actually come to fruition. Because sometimes, it can take a year or two
mm.
to buy a small business, even one that's just, a couple million in revenue, because it can be emotional. There's
Mm.
oftentimes years of sometimes shoddy paperwork, and not by any no ill will, nothing, no malice by the business owner. Just they've been busy building the business and keeping their heads above water.
Let's talk about due diligence. What are some things we should look out for if I'm looking at the owner's books, or what are some questions I should ask if I'm gonna buy someone's existing business?
Great question. Tax returns and financials oftentimes are a great place to start.
Hmm.
Those will usually give you a good snapshot. Now, it's important to note that tax returns and financial statements of a business are oftentimes very different. The reason for that is most of the time, small business people want to show that they made very little money to the government, but want to
Of
show their
course.
friendly community banker, I am very bankable
Mm-hmm.
because I've got, this gross profit, even though my taxable profit might be zero, I actually am profitable. And so getting those two sets of books is very important because they tell two very different stories, but allow you to get a good sense of where the truth lies. And then it also gives you a sense of how the business is structured. And then that's where the lawyers come in to make sure that the legal entities are good. You're not buying a liability is the phrase that we use.
Sure.
So we want to help people avoid buying a liability. We also want to make sure that whoever is selling the business, is honest and forthright, and that the contracts say, hey, in the event you withheld information, misled with certain information, or outright fabricated something because you knew that you were unloading an asset that wasn't great, we're able to hold those folks to account contractually.
One of the things we talk about in Prairie Founders Club is that oftentimes someone will be working in their business, like you talked about before. Maybe they're the salesperson, they're the operator, they're doing the books. But in order to evaluate that business and give that an evaluation, you've got to really evaluate it as if someone else is doing that. What would you have to pay someone to do that if the owner was out of it? So can you kind of talk about what are some of the different ways, and can you explain some of these acronyms that we have? SDE, seller's discretionary earnings, and I think you said EBITDA. EBITDA. So tell us about EBITDA.
All right. Well, let's start with seller discretionary earnings. I mentioned the two sets of books, right? The tax returns and the financial statements. And let's go all the way back to 1999. So Amazon, which everyone knows, famously had no profit for many, many years. Well, why is that? Well, they reinvested it all back into the business. So they had seller discretionary earnings. That is, they were making money, but they reinvested it all back in.
Interesting.
And so oftentimes the business people will get to talking with, buyer and seller will get in a room and they'll start working out numbers. And oftentimes they'll come to me, the lawyers, to paper it up and say, well, I'm going to get 50% of this or a 2x multiple of that. And my question to that is always 50% of what? 2 times of what? Because how you define that what will oftentimes have a very important trickle-down effect of what you're actually getting.
Fascinating. So, like, let's say I'm the owner. I get a benefit because I'm leasing a vehicle through the company, paying myself a little bit. I'm doing some of the jobs. How do we evaluate a business when the owner is the primary technician or salesperson?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways to do it, and I'm assuming when you are buying a business like that, where the primary technician is the owner as well, usually that is a journeyman of that same trade, whatever it is, buying that business. So the thinking I usually see is that buyer is going to step into the shoes of the technician seller, right? Optometrist, plumber, pick your trade. And in that case, really what they're buying is that customer list, because someone fresh out of optometry school or that just got their their plumbing license, they're just simply going to have less technical skills than someone who's been doing it 40 years. Now,
Sure.
that said, there's still value in the business, right? The brand, the fact that there's already HR, the fact that there's probably already an office, a lease, furniture, toilet paper, right? I mean, like all the things you need to go to the office and work every day. So that's how I oftentimes will try to counsel technicians that are buying a business or selling a business.
Do you
Is to look at it that way.
is there kind of a standard onboarding process, or once you purchase it, are you on your own, or do you somehow facilitate a handoff?
Great question. The devil is in the details there. What I like to do, so if I'm representing buyer or seller, it doesn't really matter either. Usually what I like to do is there's the primary sale, which may or may not have any cash up front. And then usually a 2 to 5 year period where the seller sticks around in some capacity, either as an employee or as a consultant to help with that transition and handoff. And the reason for that is no matter how much due diligence you do, you're not going to know how to run the business until you're the person calling the shots. And there will inevitably be questions. And so the worst thing that can happen is a clean break, right? Here are the keys to the business. I'm going to be in Aruba. Peace out. I just threw my phone into the ocean, right? That's the worst thing that can happen, because the business may not survive, especially if there's a key person or someone that's been running things, been the point of contact for 20, 30, 40 years.
About 15 years ago, I built a business that I sold, and I was hired on. So the person that bought it from me called it an acqui-hire. Is that a term people use, or is that a common thing?
Absolutely. An acquisition hire. You bet.
So
and you can do those. Oh, good.
Let's talk about. Go ahead and finish your statement about what you can do with the acqui-hire.
Oh, those all come down to contract, right? And usually the way I like to structure those is, and thinking about it from the perspective of the seller, right? If I am John and I've been doing my business, whatever that is, for 40 years, and some young buck buys it, and then suddenly I'm working for him for a couple of years, I'm probably not going to love it.
Right.
And so what you do is you try to tie John's compensation and the value of the business that he's going to get to how cooperative he's going to be, right? Because you want the business to succeed. And that's all done by contract, a combination of consulting contracts or employment contracts or the purchase and sale agreement of the business itself, however we structure that. But I think that that's a really critical piece of any transaction where there is that key man consideration.
So let's talk about legal safety nets here. What are representations and warranties, and how do they protect a buyer?
Great question. Okay, so a representation and a warranty, they're two separate things. Representation is, for example, Brian, my name is Mike Kuzma, and I am a licensed attorney in the great state of Nebraska. That's a representation. So what I'm telling you is who I am and what my license is, and that I'm in good standing. So I'm telling you those three things. That's called a representation.
Okay.
And the warranty is I'm promising that that's true. And so when you get into when you get into running the business, and you discover that things are not true. For example, I've got a transaction. I mentioned this in our pre-call. It's a real estate transaction, but one of the representations and warranties in this one was that all of the tenants are paying rent.
Mm.
Makes sense, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
that seems
Mm-hmm.
like a pretty reasonable thing in that sale to say.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the seller, whether through intentional, in like intentionally doing it or just not verifying. Well, it turns out one of the tenants, and this is a commercial property, but it was nearly $300,000 behind on rent. Well, that's not what we want,
Right.
right? And then lo and behold, you didn't pay rent to the new buyer. And so that's an example of a representation in warranty. Had my buyer known that, no, not all of the tenants are paying rent, we wouldn't have paid that multiple. And so that's a way that you can hold sellers to account if they, by negligence or purposeful omission, leave out those really important details. But then for any of the buyers listening to this, it's important for them to note that, like, when you get into these deals, you want to be sure to have, your ducks in a row, use your advisors,
Sure.
and make sure. So in my real estate deal, if my buyer had known that that the tenant in question of this center was not paying rent, we would have had to discount the price for
Right.
what we would have paid.
So they paid more than they should have. And so you have to go back in after the fact and maybe have to file some litigation or something.
Yep. And that's exactly what happened here.
Well, man, I know you've got limited time and we're getting towards the end of our time block here, but for Prairie Founders Club members, you are going to stick around. We're going to do a virtual case study. Mm-hmm. We're going to break down an imaginary business. This is an imaginary roofing business. We're going to buy it. We're going to improve the operations, and then we're going to sell it in 4 years and double the value. So I'm excited, looking forward to that. But I guess before we go, tell us about, what is the role you play and how do people get in touch with you if they are interested in something like this?
Yeah. So I can get into, I can work on for both buyers and sellers, in terms of structuring those and helping just be creative and making sure that you're buying what you think you're buying. And many entrepreneurs have read Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad. Yes. Famous
yes,
book. I hate that book. I hate it. Why? It's the reason I went to law school. Because in that book, he talks about, well, you just buy a business, you just buy the real estate. Well, I wondered, surely it can't be that easy. And turns out It's not. It's not anything that is impossible. It's just, there's a lot of steps. And in order to make sure that you are actually buying an asset and not a liability, it's really important that you move slow and get everything right. Because especially with a big transaction like that, you really only get one shot, because you can't put toothpaste back in the tube, so to speak.
Sure.
Especially with buyers, because once they hand over the keys, oftentimes, especially if a large sum of money's passed, or you've signed on the dotted line of your SBA loan, or your grandma loans you, whatever it is, it's a lot tougher to get money back once it's gone out the door.
Absolutely. How can people get a hold of you? And I'll make sure to put those in the show notes as well.
I'm at the law firm Spencer Fane in the Omaha office. Email is mkuzma@spencerfane.com. And yeah, it's the best way to get a hold of me.
Well, Mike, this has been a pleasure. I think we could talk all day about this sort of thing. It's really fun to imagine these scenarios. But thank you for your time. And for those of you that are Prairie Founders Club members, we will be continuing shortly with the case study, and we'll see you there. So thanks, Mike.
Yep. Thanks.